Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the INTP stream. I wanted to talk today about an idea that I had about Buddhism and um, and how it emphasizes. So, one of the elements of Buddhism, so far as I understand it, is the element of non-attachment, right? Of not being outcome oriented, but they're process oriented, being accepting of um, lack of control over circumstances, lack of limitless free will. And ultimately, I think what Buddhism points to is sort of the ineptitude of ambition and both ethical and existential, and emphasizes in its emphasizing of the principle of non-attachment, this attitude of not caring, right? Of caring, right, to a healthy degree, but ultimately not caring to an unhealthy degree. Um, and so, yeah, and that's the essential principle of non-attachment, which is at the core of Buddhism. But I think that there may or may not be a paradox in Buddhism that is not really commented on so far as I can see in discussions about Buddhism and discussions about the principles of non-attachment and the kind of meditative acceptance of imperfection and of imperfection that is at the core of Buddhism. And I think while Buddhism is a more evolved um, ethical and existential philosophy than many Western religious philosophies are, which are pretty, frankly, um, I wouldn't say that they're stupid or that they're obtuse per se, because even Christianity and Islam have their good elements. But I think there is something more evolved about the the non-attachment principle at the core of Buddhism. Um, Whereas in other Western religious and ethical philosophies, there is this, well, I mean, it wouldn't be too extreme to say that there's almost an attachment principle, um, emphasizing in Puritanism, for example, the need to remain pure and to have ethical ambition and to carry the weight of existence and suffering and responsibility and all of that as and that's so in some way Jordan Peterson has co-opted principles of Puritanism and other Judeo-Christian Western philosophies into his own version of the same. But I think Buddhism happens to be a lot more evolved, even if it is slightly more nihilistic. But here's the thing. There is a problem, and I believe there is a paradox in Buddhism that ultimately needs to be recognized. And to me, it's this: if you emphasize not caring, right, and people are told to some degree, not care so much, and to engage in an attitude of non-caring, which is more or less an overly simplified way of expressing the Buddhist principle of non-attachment. But in essence, um, I think it's not too. I think it's a little bit more than perhaps quippy to say that if we emphasize principle of you know non-attachment too stridently, and essentially we are promulgating a form of Buddhism that says to that one should not care so much or not care at all, then people step into the paradox of starting to care about not caring. And so that's the paradox, I think, in Buddhism, is this emphasis on not caring so much or not caring at all merely leads individuals into beginning to simply care about not caring. And that ultimately causes them to care either way. So, in some sense, that's the paradox in Buddhism. And it's only to say, from my perspective, that the principle of non attachment is very, very idealistic, even if it is healthy. It's almost as idealistic as any object in Western religious or ethical philosophy. This idea that we should simply not be attached really goes against, I think, a lot of what human nature is. And that, to some extent, achieving happiness and gratification in life requires a certain level of attachment, even if too much of the same would hamper our ability to achieve either happiness, gratification, or both. So it's only to say that while Buddhism, I think, is far more evolved in its thinking and its feeling about ethics and life and attitudes toward both, I think in many ways the principle of non-attachment, of simply not caring, is unworkable, because then individuals simply begin to care if they've adopted the ideals of Buddhism too aggressively, perhaps, or too extremely. Those people will simply start to care about not caring. Um, they will feel ashamed if they begin to care, because Buddhism tells them that's bad. And so ultimately, then, they step into the paradox of being ashamed of caring because Buddhism tells them they shouldn't. Hence, they merely begin to care about not caring and feel ashamed about caring when they're told they're not supposed to do that. Ultimately, they only end up caring about not caring, caring about how much they don't care, caring about preserving their non caring attitude. And I just think that this is an inevitable contradiction or paradox in Buddhism that everyone, perhaps indoctrinated or conditioned in Western idealism and Western religious and ethical philosophy, will inevitably step into. Whereas the West tells us there is this emphasis on attachment to some degree and caring being a good thing. In the East, there's the East form almost antithesizes that. So I don't know. It's only to say that this is not to advocate for Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy or to derogate either. It's only to say that they're based in all of these religious, primitive ethical philosophies. They're just unworkable in their idealism. We really need to come to grips with that, that we ultimately need to retire the ethical idealism of Buddhism, of Christianity, of Islam, and adopt a different attitude toward human existence, even if there are truths in these lies. And, this to me seems imperative, but the basic paradox in Buddhism to me, hopefully I've explained the mechanism of action correctly. All I'm saying is that if Buddhism tells people they should not care about things so much or not care about certain things at all, then people that do care about these things to a degree or to a degree will feel ashamed of caring about them, try to repress their care about them, hence they only start to care about not caring, leading them into a paradox that still causes them to care, which emphasizes the fact that the principle of non-attachment really is idealistic, and that a certain level of attachment, ambition, perseverance, and long-term goal orientation probably is value creating, anthropologically and socially valuable, and ultimately a good thing, in both dimensions. So it's only to say that Buddhism is a great. It's good. It's more evolved in many ways from sort of the antiquated, primitive Western ethical and religious philosophies, but it still has its inherent contradictions, and it does run afoul of human nature. Really, we need to come up with a better ethical philosophy that is grounded in what human nature is and is compassionate toward its flaws, Um, there's a certain amount of like transcendent ambition in any kind of ethical philosophy like this, where man should overcome what he is to become what he should be, and it prescribes a should that ultimately conflicts with the what in some sense. These provide prescriptions that are unworkable in normal in what we would consider the average of human nature itself. We really need, and I think Buddhism comes closer to being commensurate or compatible with human nature, and certainly many Western religious philosophies totally or completely incompatible with human nature. But Buddhism is too, even if it's reputed to be more compatible with human nature by some advocates of it. So while Buddhism may be compatible with what humans or what human life, right, and what we experience in the day to day, it may be incompatible ultimately with human nature, even if it is compatible with human life. And I would consider that a lot of like Christianity, Judeo-Christian, Western ethical philosophies, Islam, I would say that these are both incompatible with human life and human nature. So Buddhism is only incompatible with respect, but Buddhism, I think, is compatible with human life, if not human nature. And so it comes a bit closer to being a good ethical philosophy. It still has its inherent paradox, as I've pointed out. If we emphasize too much, that one should not care about things to an unhealthy degree or not care at all about certain things, then people will feel ashamed if they do care, and they'll start to care about not caring, um, and try to not care and care about not caring. And this leads them into the paradox that I think is in Buddhism, which is that attachment can't really be escaped, should be embraced, and in the way of the Sith, channeled to some productive and useful aim. Thank you for watching.